The J6, how a Chinese EV just broke the off-roader business model. For 50 years, one rule never broke. If you wanted a boxy, tough-looking SUV that could actually go off-road, you paid Mercedes or Land Rover for the privilege. $60,000 minimum, often triple that. No exceptions. Then, a Chinese automaker, nobody in Europe or Japan was watching, built a car that breaks every part of that rule, and it's become one of the fastest-growing new brands in the UK in under a year. It's called the Giga-cast. It has a flat bonnet the size of a dining table, a boxy silhouette that looks like it was drawn with a ruler, an all-aluminum body structure most supercar makers would envy, and it costs a fraction of what a G-Wagon sets you back. Right now, automotive engineers in Germany and England are staring at spreadsheets trying to figure out how this thing exists. Today we're taking it apart. The metal it's built from, the way it sees through its own floor, and a clever trick hiding on the rear door that almost nobody talks about. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the 2020s might be the decade that flipped the car industry upside down. If you find this kind of breakdown useful, hit like. It genuinely helps more people find these videos. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want the next one before everyone else does. Let's get into it. Why boxy sells? Before the engineering, we need to talk about something car companies figured out a long time ago, something that has nothing to do with horsepower or chassis specs, and everything to do with how your brain works. Think about the vehicles that hold their value best: the G-Wagon, the Defender, the Ford Bronco. What do they have in common? They're all boxes. Flat roofs, vertical windscreens, sharp corners everywhere. None of them are aerodynamic. None of them are efficient. And people line up to buy them anyway. Here's why. A boxy shape doesn't make your brain think about fuel economy. It makes your brain think about survival. Straight lines and sharp angles signal strong, solid, safe, and car companies have charged premium prices for that signal for decades. The G-Wagon has barely changed its silhouette in over 40 years, on purpose. Round off those edges and the spell breaks. It becomes just another SUV. But that boxy shape comes with a real physical cost. A flat vertical surface punching through air creates enormous drag. With a gas engine, you compensate with a bigger tank and a thirstier motor. Problem solved, sort of. Take that same boxy shape and go fully electric, and the penalty turns brutal. You're dragging a flat wall through the air on battery power. More drag drains the battery faster. A faster drain means you need a bigger battery for decent range. A bigger battery means more weight. More weight means more drag. It's a vicious cycle. Most manufacturers looked at this and concluded you simply can't build a boxy, affordable electric off-roader. The physics don't allow it. JU looked at the same problem and asked a different question. What if we made the car lighter everywhere else? The material that changes everything. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because the solution isn't one you'd expect from a mainstream SUV. The J6 is built around a multi-cavity, all-aluminum body structure. In plain language, almost every car you've ever owned, doors, roof, frame, is made of steel. Steel is cheap, strong, and has been the default for over a century. It's also heavy, and it rusts. Years of mud, rain, and road salt corrode it from the inside out, no matter how good the coatings are. Aluminum solves both problems. It's roughly a third the weight of steel for the same volume, it doesn't rust, and engineered correctly, it can match or beat steel's strength. The catch has always been cost. Shaping aluminum traditionally required precision machining and hand assembly, which is exactly why it's historically been reserved for supercars and vehicles like the Range Rover. JU cracked this with a process called Giga-casting. A machine generating thousands of tons of pressure injects molten aluminum into a mold in a single shot. Instead of welding together dozens of small steel pieces to build a subframe, you get one solid piece of aluminum that replaces all of them at once. That does two things simultaneously. It removes hundreds of weld joints, historically the weak points where cracks start and rust creeps in, and it slashes the car's overall weight. The result is a vehicle that weighs around 1,800 kilograms, despite carrying a 69.8 kHz battery pack that, on its own, weighs several hundred kilograms. Without the aluminum structure, the J6 would be considerably heavier and considerably less capable. The weight saving is only half the story. The other half is what that aluminum frame means for the vehicle's lifespan. Steel rusts when it's wet, aluminum doesn't. River crossings, salty coastal roads, weekly mud runs, the structure shrugs it all off. JU reportedly designed the J6 with a 30-year structural lifespan in mind. That's not a marketing line, it's a materials science decision baked into the bones of the car. And an aluminum frame that doesn't flex, corrode, or groan under stress does something important for the person behind the wheel. It builds confidence. In an off-road vehicle, confidence is everything. Electric in the mud. Here's the part that makes traditional off-road purists nervous. No diesel engine, no transfer case, no mechanical locking differentials. Just 2 electric motors, a battery pack, and a lot of software. If you grew up believing off-road capability came from a big, growling diesel and a mechanical drivetrain, this feels wrong. Water and electricity don't mix. So what happens when that battery gets submerged in a deep river crossing, or mud clogs the motor housing? JU addressed this head-on. The entire high-voltage system, both motors and the battery pack, is rated IP68, fully sealed against dust, and rated for sustained submersion, not just splashes. Every seal, connector, and housing was engineered around the assumption that this vehicle would regularly be driven into rivers and deep mud. But sealing the hardware is only half the advantage of going electric off-road. The real advantage is torque. Press the accelerator on a diesel and there's a delay. The engine spools up, the turbo catches, gears shift. By the time full torque reaches the wheels, a fraction of a second has passed, usually invisible. But crawling up a steep, muddy slope with a wheel starting to spin, that fraction of a second is the difference between traction and getting stuck. The J6 runs 1 electric motor on each axle, producing close to 280 horsepower and 385 Nm of torque, available instantly the moment you touch the pedal. No spool up, no waiting.
More importantly, the software controlling those motors can redistribute power between wheels in milliseconds.
If the inside rear wheel starts to lose grip on a wet corner, the system catches it almost before it happens and shifts power to the wheels with grip. No mechanical differential locking, no clutch pack engaging. It just happens, continuously, thousands of times a minute. The result, point the car at something difficult, press the pedal, and it goes. Clean, controlled, confident. Seeing through the floor, the feature getting the most attention is the one that sounds like science fiction, 540-degree transparent chassis mode. The problem it solves is simple. Off-road, approaching a sharp rock or a deep rut or an uncertain water crossing, you can't see what's directly under your front bumper. The bonnet blocks it. You either stop and walk around to check or rely on experience and feel. The J6 removes the guesswork with cameras and a processor. High-definition cameras sit under the wing mirrors, at the front grille, and at the rear. On their own, they just show the surroundings. The clever part is what the onboard computer does with that footage. It combines all the camera feeds with the car's current speed, steering angle, and suspension travel, then renders a live 3D view on the 15.6-inch central screen. The aluminum body effectively disappears on screen. You see the ground directly beneath the vehicle, including exactly where your front tires sit relative to whatever obstacle is ahead, while sitting fully enclosed in the cabin. Combine that with 200 millimeters of ground clearance, a 26-degree approach angle, and a 29-degree departure angle, and you get a vehicle that handles serious terrain while showing the driver exactly what they're dealing with. The anxiety of the unknown disappears. What's left is just the driving. The box on the back, walk around the J6 and you'll notice something on the rear door that looks exactly like a spare tire cover. Square, mounted on the side hinge tailgate. Every visual cue telling your brain there's a spare tire inside. There isn't. Open it and you find an external storage compartment bolted to the outside of the car. It sounds almost too simple, but think about the problem it solves. Off-road trips come home with muddy boots, mud-caked recovery gear, filthy charging cables, things you either stuff into a clean interior and ruin the carpet, or leave behind and lose capability. The external box moves all of that outside the cabin entirely. Fill it with the worst gear you own, close it up, and the interior stays spotless. It's a small detail in the grand scheme of the J6's engineering, but it says a lot about who designed this car. People who actually use an off-roader for off-roading, not people building something to look the part. That same philosophy carries straight into the cabin. Inside the future. Step into the J6, and the first thing you notice is the quiet. Not just no engine. Quiet. Acoustic glass and a sealed aluminum structure absorb road noise, wind noise, and vibration at a level that would be impressive in a car twice the price. The dashboard is almost free of physical buttons. No rows of switches, no separate instrument binnacle. Instead, a fast 15.6-inch central touchscreen runs on a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8155, the same chip found in high-end smartphones. It's responsive, and it controls nearly everything. The materials are premium without being flashy, and clean horizontal lines give the cabin a calm, spacious feel. Compare that to a traditional European SUV at a similar price point. A mix of carried-over physical buttons, a smaller screen that feels 5 years old, and an instrument cluster full of information nobody needs anymore. There's nothing wrong with it exactly. It just looks like a product of a different era. In a sense, it is. The car industry moves slowly. A platform designed today often underpins vehicles still selling a decade from now. Legacy manufacturers are working within supply chains and design processes built for a world where steel was king and software was an afterthought, and changing that costs enormous time and money. JU didn't inherit those constraints. The J6 was built on a clean sheet, from day one, for an electric architecture, an aluminum structure, and a software-first cabin, with no compromises made for a shared platform that also had to support a diesel option. The result feels genuinely modern in a way that's hard to fake, not because of a big screen, but because every system was designed to work together from the start. What this actually means. Step back from the spec sheet for a moment and look at the bigger picture. For decades, the formula for a premium off-road SUV has barely changed. A large steel body, a powerful engine, a mechanical four-wheel drive system, a significant badge premium, marketed to people who want to feel capable, even if most of them never take the vehicle past a gravel car park. That formula worked because building this kind of vehicle demanded enormous investment and expertise. Only a handful of manufacturers, Mercedes, Land Rover, Toyota, had spent decades refining it, and the gap between them and any new entrant was nearly impossible to close quickly. The J6 doesn't close that gap gradually. It routes around it entirely. Aluminum instead of steel, electric motors instead of combustion, software instead of mechanical systems. You don't need 100 years of diesel engine development if you're not using a diesel engine. You don't need decades of steel body expertise if you're giga-casting in aluminum. Change the technology stack, and the playing field looks completely different. This isn't a cheaper version of a G-Wagon. That framing misses the point. It's a car built around a different question entirely. Not how do we build a cheaper version of what already exists, but what does the buyer actually want to feel, and how do we deliver that with the best tools available today? The answer turns out to be an aluminum-bodied, dual-motor, software-driven electric SUV with a boxy silhouette, a floor you can see through, and a storage box pretending to be a spare tire. The established manufacturers aren't standing still. They're building their own electric platforms, their own giga-casting lines, their own software stacks. The gap will close, and competition will make better vehicles for everyone. But right now, in 2026, the J6 is proof of a principle the industry will spend the rest of this decade reckoning with. The tough, capable, emotional SUV doesn't have to cost a fortune, doesn't have to run on diesel, and doesn't have to come from the handful of brands that have owned this space for 50 years. That's the J6, an aluminum shell, a software brain, 2 electric motors, and a spare tire box with no tire in it. If this gave you something new to think about, hit like. It takes real work to research and put these together, and it genuinely helps the channel grow. Subscribe, hit the bell for the next one. Here's a question for the comments. If the J6 were available in your country today at a competitive price, would you actually buy one over a traditional diesel off-roader? Let's see where people land.